Bryce Greene, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. I just noticed during that break that the head of the Ukrainian armed forces, Zaluzhny, has discovered a listening device in his office. Things are not going too well amongst the ruling circle in Kiev, are they?
No, they are not. And this comes in a long line of these internecine struggles between the Ukrainians amongst themselves. While they're fighting a war against Russia, they're also fighting something of a war on the home front. There was all of these stories coming out in the Western press recently about how Zelensky's sort of isolated and that he's a madman who's the only one who believes that Ukraine has a shot in this war. Meanwhile, the people around him are trying to talk some sense into him, but there are deep, deep divisions in there. And we've seen the sort of violence inside of Ukraine itself escalate as a result of these tensions. And this also comes as Russia is mounting a pretty successful counteroffensive in the east of Ukraine. And so it's impossible to predict the future. But what you can say for sure is that what the United States had in mind when they initiated Project Ukraine, at least since 2014 and more recently since 2022, what they've had in mind is not panning out as the way they intended. Ukraine is not going to be able to achieve the stated goals of the war. They're going to end up most likely with the peace settlement that looks almost identical to the one that was offered or that was discussed in April of 2022. Only this time the Russians will likely ask for more. Meanwhile, the sanctions against Russia have completely backfired. There's reporting now in the mainstream press that it's more honest about how exactly the Western war against Russia has failed, and that Russia has actually come out mostly on top in this. And so this whole Operation Ukraine, this using Ukraine to overextend and unbalance Russia, as the Rand report suggested all those years ago, using Ukraine in that way has failed. All it seemed to do is completely destroy Ukrainian society and Ukrainian democracy. That these were trends that people like you and me would point out early in the war, but it seems that now they're willing to listen.
5 million Ukrainians have fled the country. The sons and daughters of the rich are in the casinos and bordellos of the flesh pots of Europe and the Caribbean. But the poor Ukrainians are living as refugees in emergency housing and third-rate hotels and so on across Western countries are very unlikely to be going home. 25%, at least, correct me if I'm wrong, of Ukrainian territory is now in the hands of Russia, and they show no signs of stopping, and certainly Ukraine is not able to stop them. I beg to differ with you on one point. I think Russia will require a lot more than was on the table in Ankara for a peace settlement all these hundreds of thousands of lives ago, and all these billions of euros ago. The likely outcome, it seems to me, is a rump stump, frankly, puppet Western Ukrainian state with a government loyal to Moscow. That seems to me the only way that this war is now going to end. What do you think?
I mostly agree, although, again, it's difficult to predict the future. All we can say for certain is that when we look at the Western power stated goal for this war, it was to protect Ukrainian democracy. It was to protect the fabric of this nation from destruction. But I mean, if we look at the actual results of this, the predictable results of this is that a lot of that social fabric has completely disintegrated. This was reported on a bit in the Western press, but mostly in the alternative, that Ukraine's political parties, the opposition parties, have been outlawed. The political climate in the country is such that people don't speak out against the government. And we've seen the media become centralized under the state in Ukraine. These are all the sorts of things that we would criticize harshly if they happen in one of our official enemy countries. But since Ukraine is an official ally being used again, like I said, by the Western powers, we don't have any problem with it. We're watching as Ukraine turns into a more authoritarian, a more oligarchic, a more or a less democratic country. That's what I predict. No matter what the territorial uh, transfers that happen, no matter what happens on that front, uh, we can say for certain that the entity known as Ukraine isn't going to be the entity known as Ukraine as it was before. It's that's gone. It's off the table, and that was a result again of these Western powers, not only back in Turkey when they were negotiating, but I mean even as recently as this summer when they were pushing this failed counteroffensive that they knew that their own intelligence people said the Ukrainians won't be able to succeed and gain all of the territory that they want. In fact, we expect that it'll be a failure. They knew this, and yet they funded it. They pushed the Ukrainians into it, and they watched from the sidelines as thousands of Ukrainians died for nothing. Now, imagine if you're a Ukrainian coming back from war, you take the time to look at these media reports, how your government hung you out to dry, how the Americans helped them do it, and how they didn't value your life. You have to come back and integrate into that society again. That's going to have long lasting consequences for any country, but especially at a beachhead of the new Cold War like Ukraine.
Amongst the political prisoners is a one-time regular guest on this show, the American citizen Gonzalo Lira. Tucker Carlson, the world's most eminent broadcaster, certainly the most widely watched broadcaster, highlighted this monstrosity just a few days ago. The American government hasn't lifted a finger to end the unlawful, unjust incarceration of an American citizen. What kind of puppet government can lock up an American citizen without so much as a whimper from the White House?
Again, we have a hierarchy of allies, it seems, and a hierarchy of priorities. America likes to, puff out its chest and say that when there's a citizen in danger, we go in and save them, and we do everything they can to protect our citizens. We saw this with the Brittany Griner business in Russia. The U.S. made a big show of doing a lot to try and get her back and chastise the Russians for, interfering in incarceration. But they don't do that in this case. They don't do that for Gonzalo Lira, and they also don't do that for the American citizens who are still trapped in Gaza. They don't care about the people who act as dissident voices. They don't care about the people who get in the way of the broader political agenda. And, this goes for all of the stated principles of the American empire. Again, we talk and talk all the time about a rules-based order, but as, the joke goes, that order is when America rules and orders people around. And it doesn't seem like they care about the citizens of their own country when it goes against what that rules-based order, quote unquote, seems to have in store. And that's just a tragic fact about the American myth that we are raised to believe and that all these people are laboring under. It's a tragedy.
As George Carlin said, the American dream, you have to be asleep to believe it. You mentioned Gaza, Bryce. Let me turn to that if I may. I'm wondering, I started out this election cycle prepared to park my bemusement at Robert F. Kennedy's stance on Israel-Palestine, but that was before a genocidal onslaught was launched against the Palestinian people with ever more unhinged support from Robert F. Kennedy, to the point that, frankly, the only conclusion you could reach, given that a man like him doesn't need money, the only conclusion you could reach is that he is somehow compromised. He is saying things like the Palestinians are the most pampered people on earth. He said that on screen just 48 hours ago. What on earth is it with the political leadership in your country that is more royal than the king, more Catholic than the Pope, more Israeli than Netanyahu? How does that happen?
Well, it happens for two very important reasons. The first reason is that Israel represents a major strategic front for the American empire. Everyone understands it, that people in the Middle East have undergone colonialism and all these Western-backed coups and interventions, and it's really left the area decimated. But one of the major places in the Middle East where the United States has major influence is Israel. They're able to use it. Even Robert F. Kennedy himself has said that the justification for America's continued support for Israel is that Israel allows America to influence the Middle East. And if America leaves Israel, or if Israel is no longer available, then that leaves the vacuum for Russia and China to come into the Middle East. I mean, it's standard neocon stuff. And that's what the American empire mandates. And the politics of American empire trickle down into everyday life in a lot of different ways. From the surveillance state to the way the military industrial complex interacts with jobs, but it trickles down on an ideological level too. People need to find justifications for empire, and right now that one of those justifications is Zionism. And one of the other major reasons is historical, is that the Israel lobby in America is so powerful that it rivals the lobby of oil. It rivals the lobby of Wall Street. It rivals all the other major lobbies in the country, and that's has a tremendous effect on Congress and the presidents and think tanks and all the other power centers in Washington. It becomes very easy to support Israel when the cost of going against Israel is extremely high, and the Israel lobby is able to make that cost extremely high. Now, the case of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is interesting because he has billed himself largely as an outsider of the American political system, a maverick who's willing to speak truth to power, and that's how he's campaigned. That's how he's built himself. But at a crucial moment in the American empire, at a crucial moment when 20,000 people are being massacred, when Israel is talking about not discriminating between civilians and militants, when Israel has said that they want to thin out the population of Gaza, that they're fighting human animals, uh, Robert F. Kennedy has decided to go along with what the establishment says. His positions are virtually identical to Joe Biden, virtually identical to Donald Trump. In fact, you could even say that Joe Biden is more moderate on Israel than RFK Jr., given that you actually have heard Biden say that the Israel's bombing is indiscriminate. That doesn't change the fact that he wants to continue supporting it. And I'm sure that there are a lot of international tribunals who will be very interested in that quote later. But it doesn't change the fact that uh, RFK Jr. has never issued that condemnation. He's never said that the bombing is discriminate. And so you have to wonder why. There are all sorts of reasons that his campaign is influenced by the Israel lobby. That's just one of the truisms of American politics. But the fact that he chose to be around those people means that if he is talking about peace, if he is talking about security, if he is talking about issuing the world into a multipolar order, this is completely counterproductive to those aims. You cannot have a multipolar world order while you're supporting the genocide of Palestinians. You can't have a multipolar world order when you are standing against the entire rest of the world in the United Nations in voting for a ceasefire. That's not how you achieve peace. That's not how you issue in a new era of new relations. It's completely contradictory to the rest of his platform. So we'll see how the rest of the campaign goes with three Zionists duking it out in the American political arena. It doesn't seem like there'll be any changes in the American political establishment, at least with respect to Israel. That change has to come from below. And one of the things I spend a lot of time doing is organizing. And I encourage that your listeners, if you're not organized already, start organizing. there's only one way that you're going to change the way that America behaves towards Israel, and you're going to have to force it. You're going to have to get together with like-minded people, uh, find things that you can do in your community, get together, build coalitions, and do it. That's the only way. Watching alternative media is important. George is very important, but it's not enough. We have to get out there. We have to get out onto the streets, and beyond the streets, we got to get out there into the meetings, into the organizations, into the institutions that will allow us to combat the Zionist political machine.
Well said. At least something's getting done in the U.S. Senate, Bryce. Sex orgies filmed for the edification. I mean, this is like the last days of Pompeii, isn't it? What on earth went wrong?
I gotta say, I do agree with. I think it was my friend Katie Halper who said at least something is getting done on Washington. I personally don't care. A lot of worse things than that goes on in those rooms. A lot of evil decisions are made, and if some love is being made on those tables, well, then I think that we should rejoice that maybe those rooms aren't as evil as we seem to think.
Jolly liberal of you. Bryce Greene, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.